I'm John Atack to this day, and this is my good friend Jeremy Sherman. And we're going to say horrible things about Donald Trump. This is an advisory warning that we are going to say horrible things about. So if you don't want to watch, don't watch. This last week, I keep losing 40 subscribers, and then they come back and then they go again, and they don't realize that we can see their names. So it's so touching. Oh, I'm really shocked. But I don't like him. He's a bad person, and that's all there is to it. I'm not no more pussyfooting.
That's all
So
there is to it. If that's all there is to it, we're done, right?
yeah, oh, that's over. I come up with a. I was talking with a psychologist friend this week, and we were talking about the possibility of like, well, let's have the authoritarian personality disorder, but of course there are two forms. There is the leader and the follower. So what I decided was that we can have authoritarian DOMs and authoritarian subs. So this is a video about BDSM, where the beautiful body of Donald Trump will be worshipped by people going to McDonald's, apparently. It's a very strange situation we find ourselves in. Hmm. Come on, you've never bitten your tongue before in your life. What's this about? Say something, Jeremy.
No, this is quite a role. The whole orientation. Um, well, I am thinking about sadomasochism in its all its forms, sadonarcissism actually, which is
Sadomasochism. Yeah.
yeah, that's and actually in a way the term is redundant. There are two ways to self-elevate. One is to demote others.
Hmm.
A lot of my work this week has been um, rethinking uh, hypocrisy. Everybody says don't be a hypocrite. And I've been revisiting a concept that's been important to me since I learned it in microeconomics, substitutes and complements. Um, when they teach it, they say that hot dogs and hot dog buns are complements of each other. You buy both of them. The more hot dogs you buy, the more hot dog buns you buy. Hot dogs and hamburgers are substitutes. The more of one you consume, the less of the other you consume.
Mm.
So it's fundamental in logic and economics. It's and versus exclusive or either or. Um, and uh, and I've been noticing how tied together a bunch of qualities are. So what we talk about when we talk about hypocrisy, we talk about Schadenfreude, projection, narcissism, gaslighting. All of those terms are tied in to each other as I see it. I see us as organisms that, to some extent, revel in not being the unfortunate or the stupid or the
Mm.
dumb or the clueless. So
Yeah.
gossip would be full of that. Watching Will Ferrell movies and not feeling like him, watching villains being smited by heroes. We are very selective about who we identify with.
Mm.
Schadenfreude is a classic example. If I hear about someone else's misfortune, it's a little bit like, well, I have a choice between saying, there go I, that is, I'll do that, or there but for the grace of God go I, as if it's luck, or can't happen here. So the relationship between them is all very interesting, and it's being driven um, with within our emotional bodies. That is, we want to feel comfort in our skin. So I have long been interested, I think I might have mentioned this before on your show, in these two questions that are a tongue twister. Is virtual virtue a virtue or a vice? And is virtual vice a virtue or a vice? And it's really interesting. Only this morning did I notice how generalizable this is. But is virtual virtue a virtue or a vice is a very old question. It goes back to
Mm.
Abraham and the false idols, and all the way through iconoclasm, the smashing of icons. That is, you go to, or Martin Luther's speaking of frequent communion, which he meant in a disparaging way, as you go into church and you pretend you're virtuous on a Sunday, and then you go out and be your beastly self the rest of the week. So that's
As
virtue.
Martin Luther was the rest of the week. Let's
That's
be
right.
honest
No,
about it.
he was terrible at it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so is virtue a virtue or a vice? Well, it's a virtue when it's a complement to real virtue, if it motivates real virtue.
Mm.
If it's a substitute, it's a problem. That is the frequent communion problem. Okay, the other one is virtual vice a virtue or a vice? Um, it, you can think of that as playing violent video games or
Mm.
midget porn or whatever, whatever you do in the fictitious world.
How did you
Um,
know about that, Jeremy?
there you go. Because that the name of the article I'm writing on this topic is "Speak for Yourself." Um, uh, which you could have said and didn't, and I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Uh,
my
uh,
pleasure.
is virtual vice or virtue or vice? We want the opposite effect on people. We want people to use virtual vice as a substitute for real vice. Get your yayas out in the fictitious world and then come into the real world and be decent. That is, play out your fantasies in the fictional world. Okay, so we expect opposite things of people. We hope for opposite things and we leave it up to them. And what we've ended up with the Trump world, the game I think they're playing is, as you said in an email to me this morning, all press is good press, or someone said it to me this
That
morning. I
wasn't
talked to
me. Yeah.
It wasn't you, but I'm going to attribute it to your wise words anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
why not?
as John Atack said, any attention is good attention, and what the Trumpists are thriving on these days is those people who want to be like him and those people who gloat in the glory of not being like him.
Mm.
That is,
As you
it's a
wrote in an
different.
email to me earlier today.
Yeah, that's right. That time, this you can attribute that to me because I
Yeah.
remember writing it to someone, and it was
Mm.
you. Um, yeah, so I'm loath to gloat these days about how much better I am than Trump, and at the same time, I'm being vicious with them, but it's a different kind of vicious. Um, I see my work as experimenting because what we're doing isn't enough. It's clearly not sufficient to keep this
Mm.
at bay. We've gotten way behind, and the question is, can we catch up and get ahead of this horrible movement? And and my approach with them tends to be, well, here's an example of how I'll respond to a troll. Um, I'll say, I hear you. I'm with you. Like you, I have fear about my own manliness. Um, it's an interesting kind of reversal of projection where you don't actually say, you don't accuse them to their face and get into a debate where they say, speak for yourself.
Mm.
You actually speak for yourself first and or say I hear you. I know what it's like to get defensive. They say what? I'm not being defensive. That puts them back on their heels a little bit. That makes it so they're being, I mean, that's one of my favorite moves. I never use it on decent folk if I can help it. It's they used to call them tar babies. That is, if you get someone to say I'm not defensive, then they're actually proving your point. So I will often level at them things um, that are impossible for them to respond to without validating my accusation. The standard one is you'll say anything to pretend you're right. No, I won't. They'll say it's right. So I don't use tar babies with decent folks. I think they're terrible. It's not
Mm.
all about you is another classic example of it.
Mm.
No, it's not. I'm not saying that, there you go. Right. So it's a tacky thing to use with decent folks, but I'm perfectly happy. My basic golden rule is whatever you do unto others is fair game for them to do unto you. And these guys are doing all these things. They do all the character assassination. I was told once again the problem with me is that I use just this morning that the problem with me is that I use ad hominem attacks, and that's why I'm not worth listening to, which is so funny coming from these guys. I mean, that's not what ad hominem attack means. I'm doing character assassination. That's different from falling for the ad hominem
Mm.
fallacy.
Yep.
Um, it's different. There are times when you need to attack character. Um,
When
but
people don't have any.
right, and it's amusing to hear them use the ad hominem fallacy on me.
Mm.
I'm a bad character because I use the ad hominem fallacy, which means that they don't have to listen to me because everything I say must be false.
Yes.
That's the ad hominem fallacy.
Game, set, and match. Yeah.
See, so I can't bite my tongue for long. Or if I
Hmm.
do, it only makes me longer.
No, but you managed. You know, it's very very manfully, I thought. Yeah, I was interested to see, just because you know there may be some of my regular viewers watching, that Grant Cardone, who is a very wealthy Scientologist, spoke at Madison Square Gardens at the Trump rally. And I mean, you know, I was glad. I think it was MSNBC. I was glad to see that they're comparing it to the February 1939 brown shirts rally that happened at Madison Square Gardens. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
nice
Then
to see.
that was part of Trump's theme too.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something in there. I don't think he realised that they were unsuccessful in taking over America at that time. His view of history might be different to ours. But yeah, you like words, so I've come up with MAGAddict and MAGAdictator. I've
That's
avoided
okay.
MAGAdictaphone because nobody has dictaphones anymore. Um, so yeah, yes, this idea that if we engage in strange and you know virtual violence and this kind of stuff, that it will somehow be cathartic and we'll somehow be better people because we've watched midget porn, or whatever it is you are actually doing in your spare time that we're not going to talk about. Um, it, it does put us in a strange place, and I suppose the perplexity, and this has been our conversation, is how to approach people who have bought something hook, line, and sinker that is actually destructive, that's actually going to harm them. And I don't have a single approach. If I'm sat talking with somebody, then the thing is to improvise. The thing is to find out who they are and what they need. And that does vary from one person to the next, thankfully. So the kind of cookie cutter production line model. But you know, my frustration for 40 years has been people who are entirely resistant. They're thought proofed. You know, they're kind of just water off a duck's back, and how you can get through. And I have never in my life seen anything quite like these last few weeks, where you've got, outside of Fox News, all of the major channels attacking Trump on a daily basis using reason. There was a very good Jon Stewart piece where he was just going, you know, how on earth he spends 12 minutes talking about Arnold's Palmer, and you know, then he does twisting to Ave Maria or whatever. Why, you know, how does this happen? At least, you know, in the Hitler times, there was some semblance of reality, because things had gone badly wrong and people were looking for a savior. But America is, to this day, and I hate to say this, the greatest country in the world. This Make America Great Again. America is the most powerful and the most wealthy. It uses a quarter of all the world's resources. What's this making it great? Joe Biden, and I had no affection for Joe Biden. I've said rude things about most of the Democrats as well as most of the Republicans. I'm not a fan of politicians generally. But Joe Biden, against my expectation, actually seems to have done a pretty good job given the mess that COVID-19 and the appallingly bad response to it created, that the economy is in recovery. But people are kind of looking at the you know, the apples on the shelf and saying, yeah, but it's costing me 25 cents more than it used to cost, that apple. So he didn't bring the price of things down. And they haven't got, you know, how inflation, disinflation, deflation, these things work. And they really think that by putting tariffs of, and I quote, from 20 to 2,000% on all imported goods, inflation will go down, or
The-
the economy will.
all of this
Craziness.
is
Craziness.
all of this is understood, and you get it on the news elsewhere,
Yep.
everywhere. And I'm still talking about something different.
Hmm.
Um,
Midget
the
porn.
reveling that we can do in how we're not like them. Um, uh, I worry not just about cults, but counter cults. They tend to go together. Um, and they speak to a very human appetite and they're easy to get addicted to.
Sure.
Um, and and
I've had 40
so I've
years
had a
of,
few. I've
of
had a few.
not belonging to any counter cult group for exactly that reason, because I see how groups.
Maybe so, but I also want to point out that some of what you said in the last little bit, I could feel the joy off you. I know the joy of being smarter than that. And you don't have to admit to it. Let me just say, I'll speak for myself. I'm speaking for myself. I have a giddy way that I talk when I'm gossiping about fools. I know it. I see it. I feel it. I love that joy. I just have to manage it. And I'm also saying that it can be counterproductive to us at this time. So I have a couple of interesting experiences in the last couple of days. I have all these people who write to me in response to my videos. I'm glad that I'm getting hits on them these days. Not a sign that my production values are up, but that people are looking. They're asking that question, and they're asking, how can people think this? But they're no longer asking it as a gloating rhetorical question. They're asking it, I mean, for years now, I've heard people say, how could people be so foolish? And there's a certain kind of joyous finality in that, like I'm a different species from them. But I'm actually
That's really not my position, Jeremy. But
that's
you're speaking
fine.
for yourself.
You're fine. It's fine. It's fine. Whatever. I'm saying it's mine, and I
Yeah.
see it in lots of people, and I see it in you. You don't see it in you. That's fine. Totally fine. I don't
Well,
have to.
but I think your interpretation is narrow and lacking in substance. To say that amusement is gloating, to say that I am seeing these people as inferior to me and taking satisfaction from that, not at all. I've spent 40 years helping people who find themselves in difficult situation. I have not done a series of videos attacking Trump voters at all. I've done things in the
Yeah, and I
attempt to
have.
help them. Yeah, and
No,
you have.
no,
So
and
I'm not in it.
you
Gloating
talk about
is
what
not one
they
of my
need.
habits, you know.
You talk about what they need. How do you mean that when you said I improvise, I try to figure out what they need? What do you mean by what they need?
Well, you see, I'm not talking specifically about talking to Trump voters.
That's fine.
I've talked
That's
with
fine.
very few Trump.
But that included them, so I want to understand what you mean by it.
No, what I was talking about is my approach to people, not my approach to Trump voters. Where I
Okay,
live,
but they are people, so I want to know what you
yeah,
do.
yeah. Let
What do
me
you think? Yeah,
let
I'll
me
let
be
you.
specific.
Good.
I can only think of actually having had conversations with two Trump voters. That was during the 2016 election cycle. Where I live, there are no Trump voters,
Right. Of
because there's
course.
nobody
No.
voting in your election. So, I have a little bit that comes and goes, through my comments, and people can look at that I've tried to answer things studiously and seriously without put downs. So, what I'm talking about is talking to hundreds of people who are involved with extremist authoritarian sects, cults, as people generally know them. And so seeing what they need is what will it take for them to stop hurting themselves by doing what they're doing.
Got it.
But
Okay.
yeah,
And yet you also said just now without attack. What was your word? It wasn't attack. Without insulting them. What was your word? I forget what it was.
I don't know.
It was
I
something
don't
like
listen when I'm talking.
without jabbing them. See, I'm trying a different approach. I've described it on your show before.
Mm.
Um, I'm interested in carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
And so my carrot sticking approach is that I jab them plenty,
Mm.
but I don't do it from high ground. And I'm not exclusively interested in what they need because actually I'm more interested, they could do whatever. But they can't, I don't want them screwing up the world.
Yeah.
And so I am very interested in how to mix those two strategies. And I have really interesting conversations as a result. So I'm in a lot of touch with a lot of Trumpists, former Trumpists, Jill Stein voters, and all of them because I spend a lot of time, because I'm in the United States. Had fabulous conversation, 2-hour conversation where I talked maybe 10% of the time, if you can believe it, which is really unlikely for me. With a Silicon Valley successful entrepreneur from Israel. His father went through the Holocaust and from Romania and is a Trump supporter. And we're Long-standing buddies. He likes how I think.
Hmm,
He disagrees with me wholeheartedly. He
sure.
watches my videos, which is kind of impressive, and then he sends me stuff like the Tucker Carlson Elon Musk interview, where Elon Musk talks about how if the Democratic totalitarian party comes into power, all Republicans will be thrown in prison. He sent me this wonderful study. It was a an attempt by a it wasn't a study. It was a letter that got 1 million views at least. It might have been even more, um, by a Trumpist who's trying. You can just feel her straining to sound earnest and rational in her rationalizations for him. And the big tell was at the end when she says Trump doesn't deserve no. Trump doesn't deserve to be president. Nobody does. Okay, well, if you do that kind of false equivalent, you've lost me right there. But anyway, we have these wonderful conversations, and in it, I asked him, do you worry at all about Trump being a fascist?" He says, "Well, as someone who's lived the life I have with my father, this Holocaust survivor, um, I think I'm plenty wary about fascism taking over. And no, I don't see it." I said, "Can you think of any reason why someone who has suffered under oppression like that um, might be wrong, might actually fall for fascism again?" And um, and he said, "Well, of course, this is a standard move he makes, which is, of course, everybody's fallible. So I could be wrong just for that reason." I said, "Can you think of anything specific to people who've been oppressed?" And he said no, he couldn't, but he was interested enough to listen to my response, which is obviously, if you've been the oppressed, you could come away thinking the world is made up of oppressors or oppressed, and you'd rather be one than the other.
As
You'd
Donald
rather
Trump has
be on the
said,
side.
we're either predators or prey. He's, so.
That's right. No, so he's of that world, and many people are, and that's one of the reasons
Mm,
that people would fall for it.
mm,
Had a wonderful conversation yesterday with a guy. He commented on my post. He was someone who fell down the Fox News rabbit hole
mm.
and only woke up out of it when he was getting prepared to do public violence. Um, it was fascinating. So
Mm.
I've got a few like that. So you hear about these few people who come around, and they don't come around just because I don't insult them. They need a combination because we're talking about the most challenging issue in the world, from my perspective. How do you humbly humble people, humans, who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? I think that's the make it or break it question for humankind, and I think it's the hardest question to possibly deal with. So you were addressing this earlier, and I'm going to let you have the floor in a nanosecond, just to
Yes.
say uh, uh, it really is hard, and
Mm,
all I do is experiment because I think the techniques that we are using aren't enough. So I experiment, and I don't mind if one of my experiments fails.
mm.
And I do see them as different from Scientologists in a safe world. And I
Sure.
am trying to figure out how to save them, but I do not, that's not my priority. My priority is actually saving humankind, um, and, and saving it from a kind of um, speak for yourself hypocrisy that would be very natural for us all.
Mm, okay. Yeah. I mean, I make no immediate comparison between different fanatical groups. My expertise is with one particular group, though I have dealt with Krishnas, Rajneeshis, Moonies, members of the Labour Party, the Tory Party, atheists. I've dealt with people of all sorts of faiths, and the differentiation is how fervent they are. And so, I'm an agnostic, but a couple of my friends are devout Christians. I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with people having beliefs other than my own, save where those beliefs are used as a justification to harm others. And as people slip into that, that's the only two Trump voters I have talked with. I've exchanged a few comments, but that I've actually had conversations with. Things got difficult because one of them then said that the Holocaust didn't happen. Now, I'm not suggesting that all Trump voters are Holocaust deniers, but and he really knocked me because he realized that I was getting annoyed with him. And I'm not particularly, I've got annoyed with you in the past, but that's not surprising, let's face it.
I invite it.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I'm normally a fairly, calm, patient sort of person. And he was kind of going, look, you shouldn't be getting annoyed with me. That's not proper in the circumstances. And I went away and thought about that, and I thought he does have a point, but the point is that it's one thing to vote for Trump. I get that, but when you get to the point where you're saying the Holocaust didn't happen, the Shoah didn't happen, not, it was on a different scale, but it didn't happen. The Fred Leuchter point of view, what have you, Institute for Historical Review, all of those lovely people, Willis Carto. And it stops me that somebody can believe they can revise history to the extent that they can wipe out the accounts of hundreds of thousands of people. And so it puts me into this place where I'm interested to have a conversation. What happened with that was I spent 3 days looking through Nuremberg transcripts and various things and sending material to this guy. And I didn't hear from him again after.
No. So I get that. And one of
Mm,
the big things I focus on is not taking their frame dominance. Uh, I think that they have a handful of moves, and one of them is the one you just described, which is you're insulting to me, or you're not being nice,
mm,
and I won't take that.
mm.
I certainly won't debate them based on facts. That's not what's going on there. That's not the game they're playing at all.
Don't I
Um,
know it?
uh, right. So, yeah, so you learn from experience that's not actually what they're doing. It's not about facts and it's not about
No.
rudeness. How could it possibly be about rudeness if they are supporting someone as rude as Trump?
Mm,
But they will clutch their pearls. It's one of the standard moves they make, and I savage them for it.
mm,
I give them I point out, you will say anything. They have a handful of basic moves. One is that one, which is I don't deserve to be insulted. You
mm,
should be nice. I
mm.
call it nicecism. Um, Another one is I'm a street fighter because I can parrot a few generic cliches from the kindergarten schoolyard. But they don't say that all. They just pretend they're thugs. So they'll alternate between playing prude and and brat.
Mm.
Uh, uh, those are two. What I don't understand, or I haven't heard about that, so it's off the table. In
Yeah,
effect, I'm a know-it-all, and anything I don't know is irrelevant.
yeah.
Um, and um, and there's another one that yeah, they all basically say speak for yourself. I know you are, but what am I? And the formula. A guy wrote to me yesterday. He said, "We all know that Trump won 2020. We all know." And I said, and my response was, um, I don't bet you know what we all know means. Um, or probably you once did, but now you're just mouthing things that
Mm,
you're just parroting things from. Um, and you can eat my cooter is basically, so after laying it out, I used a vulgar attack on him. Because I didn't go into the bother of, no, actually 60% of the people know the thing. That's not the game he's playing
mm,
when he says we all know.
mm,
So you look for these tells, and you don't. I'm at least as interested in giving them in disappointing what they
mm,
need as I am in giving it. And I have a choice. E Either I can fight this with one hand tied behind the back because I don't want to be rude. That's the word you use. Um, uh, or I can treat this as psychological warfare as a bulwark against physical violence.
mm.
We're on the verge of a civil war here if we don't
Yes,
watch out.
yes.
So I'm using these last few weeks to taunt them. Um, and because soon it's going to be more
And we
difficult.
will
And
be we will be posting your address online so they can come and
that's
respond
right. No, no,
in person.
I expect that degree of vulnerability. If you're not only
You're
the
going down to
parent,
Mexico next week,
only
yeah?
yeah, only the paranoid survive. I could end up like Trotsky. It's unlikely. I mean, there'd be vanity in me thinking I'm that big a player in this. But they only have to kill a few people, and they probably start with lower level people. Anyway, I don't feel at risk that way.
Mm,
And part of that is probably that I've lived this incredibly safe life.
mm.
But part of it is also that we're on the verge of another round of what has happened over and over in history, addicted to one cause or another, all of them full of their lies, as stupid as there was no Holocaust. I mean, what's the difference between saying that the universe was built in 7 days by God
It's
versus
6 days, actually.
6 days? He took one day off. But uh, a sick day. He took a sick day.
6 days.
Um, he
I should
wasn't,
think
he
he was
could have,
bloody tired after all that, you know.
he was tired and he wanted to watch some TV or something.
Yeah,
Anyway, uh,
midget
I
porn.
have a, I have, I had a conversation this morning with a Catholic priest friend of mine, um, about exactly this stuff. I think we all need our escapism very badly. That's why I watch midget porn. Um, uh,
We've got
we,
that. I'm glad we've goaded that out of you.
it's so not true. But believe me if you want.
Now you
Uh,
watch giant porn, we know.
That, that's right, I do. That's actually probably closer to the truth. Because I'm fantasizing that I'm young and heroic
Mm.
when I watch porn. I call it porn nostalgia at this point because I am wistful for the time when I was wistful for a time when I was drawn to all that stuff. It's an old habit of mine. But one
And
way
you
or another,
used to
escape.
read Robert Crumb graphic novels, yeah?
Oh, totally. No, I loved them.
Yeah.
In part because the guy was he spoke for himself.
Yeah.
In some
And
art forms
how?
you can. He
Yeah.
admitted to he admitted to what a piece of work he was.
He wanted the attack of the 50-foot woman.
There's that, but I'm actually saying something beyond that, which is
Oh,
that
sorry.
he was so easy to make giddy.
Yeah, well, it works both ways, Jeremy.
It's true. Um, um, so yeah, no, he was someone who was extremely earthy about who he was.
Mm, yeah, good
He
for
is
him.
someone like that. And I have a pantheon of romantic cynics who do that.
Mm,
They're important to me. These
of
people
course.
who are deeply romantic and deeply cynical and inclusive of themselves. They see
Mm,
that humans are a piece of work, that humans are the worst, and they don't say it about others as if they're somehow an exception. I
mm,
mean, a driver for my work from the beginning was exempt by contempt. That is, the more disdain you show for other people's traits, the more you prove you don't have them. It's very standard. It's basically a definition of projection, which
absolutely,
I
yeah.
think is a very, very blunt term. It needs to be unpacked far more than that.
Mm,
And its natural history etiology needs to be unpacked more than it gets from the term projection.
yeah.
And yeah, there are taboos against using these words, and it's understandable because someone can project that someone else is projecting. That is, the
Mm,
recursive aspect of them is a real problem.
yeah.
Um,
Especially the people who gave us the term at the beginning, but we won't get into,
that's right. That's right. And
we
so,
won't do
yeah,
any
no,
Freud bashing today.
so I've done articles about how to diagnose a nice narcissism diagnoser, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
Anyway, so all that.
All that. Well, that's a good start. Um, yeah, and I think also let's talk about the lifting of the Censorship Act under George the First, because I think that's quite important at this point. That somewhere in the 1720s, George the First decided he was going back to Hanover because he didn't like the climate in England, and before he went, he appointed a prime minister, our first prime minister, but he did not give authority for him to renew the Censorship Act. And so something happened in England and Scotland, of course, which had been, and Wales, which had all been pulled together shortly before, the Scots very shortly before, that there was no censorship. And suddenly we got Gilray and, all of these absolutely brilliant satirical people. And sometimes your conversation seems to me like Gilray without the drawings, that that
Yeah, so
I'm
there's
not
an
opposed to
edge to
that.
this.
Yeah.
No, I'm not, and satire and parody,
Yeah.
they're within the set of irony, or they're in the set of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
That is either one. You can use them for either one, and we've been dealing with a loosened society overall. And what I'm noticing is that in general, what we get is higher degrees of gloating, and on the edges we get the irony that I find in my pantheon of romantic cynics. A lot of it is whether we include ourselves in it, to me. That is, whether it's me too. All of my work, I mean, all of it started with me saying I wouldn't put it past me. That became my
Yeah.
earliest mantra for all this work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my early training as a teenager was in Zen Buddhism and Taoist thoughts, and having spent far too much of my life studying mysticism, the first the desire to become Buddha is the last desire. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. That so one is caught up always in the hypocrisy of the endeavor. And I'm kind of stopping and thinking about it because I hope I don't gloat. I don't really want to. And that those feelings of superiority and inferiority, the I'm better than you, those I don't feel those as powerful drivers in my life. As a teenager, as an adolescent, certainly, but I don't feel that now. I'm kind of aged and curious about human behavior and the self-destructive nature. I'm not a fan of Freud's Thanatos, though, of course, he never used the word Thanatos, but the idea that we have a death wish. We either want to screw it or kill ourselves. Those are the two basic drivers. I don't really believe that. But watching so much of humanity, to what extent do people, and I'm not a big fan of Democrats. I hope I've really underlined that, though I
You
do.
have.
Yeah,
You certainly have.
good. Even Barack Obama, and I had so
Fair
much
enough. Fair enough. Keep
hope
going.
there. But I think trying to judge people and look at how truthful they are, and how honest they are being with themselves. It strikes me that very few people, there's a Joni Mitchell line about no tanks have ever wandered through these streets. And that in the US, people have not been bombed from the air unless they were in the wrong part of Oklahoma in 1922 or what have you. It's whereas in Europe, we had a massive world war. We had Mussolini, we had Hitler, we had Franco. What was the name of the Portuguese bloke? We've had real and actual dictators. I'm not sure there's a real sense among the electorate in the US of what fascism means. And my hesitation, and I hope it's not gloating, I think it's more terror than gloating, is that Trump has said he will do these things. And whenever anybody, including Fox News, has said, well, you were joking, weren't you? He said, no, I'm not joking. Dictatorship from day one. 15 to 20 million people. And the thought of, well, how far do we go with that? Having seen and having spent far too much time studying what the Nazis did, I'm writing about it again right now. So I've just been through 3 more books in the last few weeks. Seeing what they believed and what they were willing to do through this othering, this sense of, there's us and them. My conversation with a Trump supporter many years ago, one of the words that, a Trump supporter, one of the two, was the concept of patriotism, that he was a patriot. And we looked the word up in the dictionary, and it didn't mean what he thought it meant. And it's sort of, well, you're a MAGA patriot. Does that mean that you would defend Democrats? Does that mean you would defend the rights of people like Elon Musk, who are immigrants? That this has tipped so much into racism that we're talking about wetbacks. We're talking about Latinos as immigrants. We're not talking about South Africans who have, talk about predation and destruction of the American people, that what Elon Musk has done is just absolutely appalling. How so the point is bringing reality to people. Now, I feel that if you're going to persuade somebody, yeah, reasoning, I put reasoning aside a long time ago. You get to the evidence only when you've got the person to a place where they're willing to consider the evidence. And I would agree with you, we by nature are not willing to consider the evidence, because if I start thinking that you understand reality better than I do, then that means my perception and interpretation of the world has gone wrong. And that means I can't trust myself. And so we better be very careful here in how we approach this and the amount of cognitive dissonance that we rouse in people. But finding, why are people emotionally attached to this? What is this representing? Is this really some kind of, as I think it very often is with cult groups, the need for a parent, the need for somebody else to be responsible because the world's too confusing and I don't know what to do with it. And I can grab onto this certainty. And the certainty is, in fact, a belief. It's not a knowledge, of how many people knew that the insurrection was just an attempt to bring, the true results through, because everybody knows. The sense of certainty, noesis, as William James called it, that people have this emotional attachment to something that must be true. So here in the Brexit campaign, which ran in parallel to the Trump campaign in 2016 and was run by Robert and Rebecca Mercer's money, and Steve Bannon and people were involved, we had this great slogan, which was "Take back control." And you go, "Make America great again" is quite good, but "take back control" is a perfect slogan, because take back control of what? If we leave Europe, then we'll have taken back control. And that way of emotionally influencing people, going, "Oh, my life's out of control, I'd love to take back control," just getting in there deeply and getting into that emotionally underdeveloped landscape, where people have not really become adult, not really, and I'm not suggesting that I have for 1 minute, but they're not willing to accept responsibility for simple, evident things. The things that Trump has said in the last few weeks are staggering. And as has frequently been pointed out on the various news channels that aren't Fox, if Kamala Harris had said any of the things, Jon Stewart said, if she'd said, well, Billie Jean King had a huge vagina, then we'd be shocked. Trump doesn't shock us. We kind of expect him to be a half-wit clown, which is what he is. He shows no profound understanding of anything other than foxing people, other than, selling watches and Bitcoin and coins and trump cards and sneakers and kind of, it's like a surreal fantasy that we're watching. How do you get people to wake up to realize that they're inhabiting a dream? How do you kind of pinch them so that, because, yeah, this is life or death. If Trump gets into the White House, there is every possibility that there will be a war in the Middle East, that he will back Netanyahu. I don't think Biden has done well in stopping him, and I think he should have stopped him by now.
That's a tangent. Let's
it is a tangent, but the end of the world is a significant and important tangent.
This is understood. We understand that. We're on the same
ground.
It
may be that our entire audience doesn't. So, this isn't just a conversation between the two of us. This is a conversation for the benefit of others. And it may be that there are people who haven't understood that if Ukraine falls, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, right through Eastern Europe, we might see a grab, which will propel us into a war that is potentially far worse than any war we've seen. Putin has already said he's willing to use nuclear weapons. How serious are people getting about this if nearly 50% of American citizens are willing to vote for somebody who it seems kind of obviously is going to go down that path? He's going to support the dictators. He's recently said how much he likes Xi. So he's had just one right-wing dictator after another. These are the people that he favors. When he was president, he withdrew 180 troops from Syria so that Turkey could launch an attack on the Kurds, who were holding 70,000 ISIS people. And it was like, because he likes Erdogan. And it's like, yeah, well, let's do that. How do we bring reality to these people? How do we get through the emotional bond that they have to whatever they think this man is, and show them that, in fact, he is the bogeyman? And
Well, do you have any suggestions? You made one just now when you said you use the word pinch them.
yeah,
That's a little closer to what I'm talking about
yeah,
as part of the technique.
yeah.
But do you have any other suggestions, or are you asking that kind of broadly? How do you get through to people who are this far into a self-comforting fantasy?
Well, on a one-on-one basis, I've done it with hundreds of people. So I know there's a way of doing it one-on-one. But between now and the 5th of November, I don't know how many people I can talk to make the slightest bit of difference. And I'm still stuck with this sort. I know how to help people change their minds. I really do. But the responses that we're getting, I mean, I could have just kept my mouth shut, but I invited you into a conversation about this, a few weeks ago when we launched into these diatribes, because I wanted to talk with somebody who was thinking about the same thing and had a different perspective on it to me.
Good. Well, yeah, and I do. I
Hmm.
mean, we have slightly different perspectives, but we agree on this, that it is still psychological. That is, we're still dealing with individuals and their choices.
Yeah.
Um, but we're also having to deal en masse. And so that involves some bulk work, like my video a day till Trump,
Mm.
till the election. Um, and then some interaction with them otherwise, and then the recognition that there's a lot of one-on-one. I have many friends who've driven to Nevada so they can do get out the vote work.
Yeah.
I've done that in past elections, not this one. Um, but it's much more profound than that from my perspective, because these are really people who have the other deflection is I'm only kidding. That is, one of the things that Trump has done is come across as both scary and a buffoon.
Mm.
And he gets to choose which one he plays up. It's like, I was only kidding. Geez, can't you take a joke? Sort of a thing. One way or another, the whole point of the movement is nothing but getting away with pretending you're always right. And so this current episode, which has lasted me 10 years. I have felt for 10 years like I'm a tax preparer before taxes are due. This is my season. Um, because we're dealing with this big challenge, this overgrown movement in a country that has assumed for the last 250 years that it can't happen here. Um, this was a kind of dream of
It's what
uh,
Sinclair Lewis. It can't happen here. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. But also, it's Schadenfreude again. It's
Mm.
the same thing I'm talking about, which is that the misfortunes of others are a substitute, not a complement to the potential misfortunes for us,
Mm.
which would be a huge human appetite. I mean, I just think that language is, on the whole, a thin overlay on bodies that just the top priority is feeling comfort in our own skin. And so it is very uncomfortable to have to face facts or see where we could be wrong, or experience any doubt or curiosity at all.
Mm.
So one of the themes I've been working with them in the last month has been interesting. It's just an experiment, but Karl Rove says you don't attack their weakness, you attack their strength, and I think he's right about this. Karl Rove's the
Mm.
Bush whisperer, who got him elected,
Mm.
and successfully employed this uh, a against John Kerry. So, what is their key strength? According to them, it's that they are macho, that they are tough. Um, And I don't think they are. And I've been playing that. In fact, I have been talking about how they are. I've been calling them homoerotic.
Mm.
I've
Yeah,
been,
I did watch the video you sent
yeah,
over earlier. Yeah.
yeah. I'm teasing them about that,
Mm.
about how they have this major man crush on, and I don't know that it's working on it, but certainly a pinch.
Well,
And many of them are
thusly DOMs and subs, there's the same sort of direction, and not aware I would have expressed it just a couple of weeks ago. But it is worrying me that you're talking about them being sissies. I'm talking about them being subs.
right.
So it,
No, it's the same thing. And not only that, we seem to be getting to it, and it turns out there's a history on this. In the early days of the Nazis, there was a theory that they were gay. And if you look it up now, it's called the gay Nazi myth. A myth. And why is it a myth? Well, it's debunked, supposedly debunked for two reasons. One is it's impolite to gay people. So I have to make a point of saying gay people who come out of the closet and withstand the insults
mm,
um, are way braver than these
yeah,
guys in the closet.
yeah,
Um, I think they're actually bisexual if you wanted to generalize about them, but one way or another, they're scared of women. But the other reason it was called a gay myth was because they did all these things to attack gays, like the pink triangle and all that.
yeah,
That does not mean they're not gay. It means that they're afraid of contamination by something they're already experiencing. It could mean that they fear contamination by something that they already feel contaminated
mm,
with. And um, and I would say that's a situation for us all. That is, I have my internal doubts. And if you would voice your doubts to me, it could tip me over into self-doubt, which is doubt about whether I have the wherewithal to deal with the doubts I'm handling.
mm,
Um, all of that is incredibly uncomfortable in a human's skin.
mm,
That's all. It's as simple as that. And I could explain why we are such an anxious, hypersensitive species, and why with language, we can escape that
mm,
into what you described as beliefs earlier. But one thing I do know is that I have to try a combination. I'm looking for the right mix of carrots and sticks. I'm looking for the right mix of pokes or pinches, as you described them.
mm.
Um, and because I don't have the advantage of being able to say, what do you need? So this is one thing I did
Yeah.
learn from you. I think it's a very useful technique, but all the techniques are circumstantial. When you told me several visits ago about how you get people hooked on into enough curiosity with you on the question of how are you going to persuade your grandmother that you are safe being a Scientologist.
Mm.
I don't have that advantage in this circumstance
Oh,
because these people's safety is mostly a product of them conforming to the local standard.
mm,
And they put themselves in an incredibly unsafe place if they become the defiant ones. This will be a big effect on the inaccuracy of the polls. Those people who can't locally admit that they are voting for Trump or for Harris. Either
mm,
way, it could tip either way. They'll do whatever in the voting booth, but
mm,
I mean, I've known Trump support. I've known people. I have a 90-year-old friend in upstate New York, and she says she's a Republican. And if you talk to her a while, no, it's clear she's not. She'll even admit it. But she couldn't possibly get away with admitting she was a Democrat locally. So
mm.
I don't get to say, think of it this way. Another thing that they did early on in this movement is they pre-dismissed anybody who disagrees with them
Mm.
is beneath contempt and not worth listening to.
Yeah.
So how will you persuade your daughter that it's okay that you're a Trumpist? Could come up. It's just not
Yeah.
likely to be a dominant place to find heart Velcro for these people. They're looking. They're only looking to double down.
Mm,
The only thing left for them to learn is how to be more effective in staying in their bubble.
mm.
That's the only learning they're willing to do anymore is how to get
And
more secure, not less.
And you have a kind of everyman approach, the kind of Jungian idea that we have within us all of these possibilities. Every one of us, we have these foibles. Every one of us, that we just lean more towards one or another of these dispositions. And I think there is truth in that, and it's also not true, which is, unfortunately, the paradox that we find in human thinking, that we have to then consider the other. I think that people are slanted in different ways. I think we can learn. I think we can acquire. We can look up the word humility and get some idea of what it means, at least. Even if our modesty is all false. But on the point of grandmas, it was the mother, and it's if I was taking the mother into an intervention with somebody, I would say, your mum thinks that you've been brainwashed into a cult. It was very specific to deal with the problem of, how are you seen by this other person who you love, and how can you put an argument forward to them? It becomes it's a rhetorical question. I've never seen anybody actually directly answer it. They go then through the process of an intervention to understand what's happening. How to reach a group of people, as you say, I'm not sure feeling comfortable in our own skin is the be all and end all of being human.
I never said it was a be all and end all. I said it was a priority.
Yeah, but I think because it is not the be all and end all, let me put it that way, that it is nonetheless something that you're quite right is vital. That how is this person self-soothing, which is pretty much how I see Trump, as somebody who just self-soothes. That's all that's happening, so that he doesn't have to take. The thought stopping is so complete that he never has to take in. Seeing this movie, The Apprentice, come out, and Three Cones, Three Rules for Happy Living, and how much you always claim victory. And it's like, oh God. So to what extent are people comforting themselves with the thought that the world is too chaotic, and if I latch hold of this strong man, then everything will be all right?
That sounds straightforward. So let
Mm,
me get back to something you said at the beginning of that.
sure.
You said it's true and it's not true. Hannah Arendt said one of the things that amazed her was that she was unable to predict who would fall and who wouldn't fall for this kind of
Mm,
self-soothing.
yeah.
Um, uh, and earlier you said something I thought was fascinating and reminds me of what I've been writing this morning as a script for a video come out tomorrow morning, I think. Um, you said, I hope I'm not gloating.
Mm,
I don't want to gloat.
yeah.
Okay, now try this out. This is a new concept for me this week. So any of those terms I mentioned earlier have to do with walking your talk. That is, if someone calls you a narcissist or a hypocrite, what they're basically saying is you're not walking your talk. And they're
Yeah.
saying, stop being a hypocrite, like someone said to me yesterday, a Trumpist said to me yesterday. Okay, so how does one stop being a hypocrite? There are two ways to do it, from what I can tell. One is to start walking your talk.
Mm,
That is, behave the way you describe your behavior. Um, and when you're dealing with someone who's self-idealizing to some extent, as I think we all do, um, that would involve changing your nature to some extent. That is, you'd have to really work on changing your behavior. Now, we also say a lot of uh, uh, people don't change, and I think that people change rarely and modestly and slowly, but
yeah.
they don't change automatically like reprogramming a robot. I call that robo envy, the desire to be able to get away with doing things like saying, yeah, I've decided I shouldn't be a hypocrite, so from now on, I'm not. Or I hope I'm not a hypocrite, so I'm going to reprogram myself.
Mm,
There's a lot of that kind of aspiration. So that's one way. The other way is to make your talk match your walk. That is, actually speak for yourself.
mm,
Now, both of those strategies could work. The first one, where you is tends people to say, I I realized that I wasn't walking my talk.
Mm.
So I changed my walk, and now I don't have that problem anymore. I used to be like that, but now I don't. One way or another, if you don't admit to what you are, you're not actually putting it on the table where you can keep an eye on it. We don't regulate black markets. That's famously the problem. So if we can't admit to what we are, we're very unlikely to manage it. Um, what we're more likely to do is get meta-hypocritical, which is hypocritical about our own hypocrisy. That is, other people are hypocrites, but I'm not. That's where people will go. If they decide that they declare that they are going to or have already conformed their walk to their talk. I am a much I think that talking our walk is harder.
Mm.
I think I get away with it because I'm not accountable to anyone for food on the table. I think I'm capable of doing it because I had 10 years of psychoanalysis, and all that was for me. The only merit I could see in the entire process was that it gave me a whole long time to stew in my own shit,
Mm.
to where I got inured to it to some extent. It started at age 8. But between that and a certain kind of safety in my life, where I don't have to keep food on my table by keeping up appearances, it's very easy for me to talk my walk. It would be harder for most other people. The other thing is I work in a mistake-tolerant line of work. If I was a surgeon, I couldn't afford to make
Mm.
mistakes. I spend my day editing me, which means I'm correcting me all day. It doesn't make me flinch.
Mm.
And it also doesn't cost someone a life. So these are all circumstantial. It's
Yep.
much easier to declare yourself someone who has conformed his walk to his talk the way the Trumpists do. Uh, it's much less effective in actually changing it so you're not a hypocrite. It's much
Mm.
more prone to it. I even wrote in this article that I think that someone who admits that he watches TV, that he watches porn, um, as a form of escapism and to pretend heroism, may be doing more for themselves and for society than someone who meditates
Oh,
and
yeah.
comes away thinking that they're approaching enlightenment.
Mm.
That is, you're doing the world a public service when you do your escapism safely, when you indulge in safe escapism. You know, I've been saying for years, take your flights of fancy, but always with a return ticket to reality secure in your heart pocket. Zip up after. Self-love is important, but get a room and zip up after. Don't
Mm.
let it go to your head.
Mm.
And don't circle jerk in a closet in the middle of town square to your fantasy, you know, that you can rule the world because you've solved reality. That's just tacky.
It's good advice, but
I,
how do you put it on a bumper sticker, you know?
I have it on a bumper sticker.
Good. I knew you did. I knew you did.
I'm wordy with you because I'm trying to keep my percentages up in
Mm.
conversation. So
Absolutely, yeah.
so anyway, the move where you say, I hope I'm not gloating,
Mm.
I don't want to gloat, is not the move I prefer. I prefer the move where I don't pretend that I don't want to gloat. I have to admit to myself there's a part of me, an anxious human being, that revels in gossiping about other people and their cluelessness, that revels in watching movies where I feel superior, that revels in porn. I think that's a better way to do it than to claim I have no intention, I have no appetite for that. I want to put it on the
But
table so I can manage it.
can you define the word gloat for me? Because we may have a difference of opinion
Oh
over
yeah,
this.
I pulled it out my butt just now. You could say feeling chuffed is an example of it. Any way in which one feels affirmed. It's really about affirmation. And this is the fundamental thing as I see it about us humans. With language, we are trudging through a sandstorm of real and imaginary threats and missed opportunities. We're an incredibly anxious species because we can also imagine the ideal. No
Of
other
course.
animal has the concept of infinity or the ideal or the perfect person. So we can imagine the ideal, see where we fall short, and then self-idealize. So So we are all hungry for affirmation, whether you were spoiled on it as a young child or deprived of it, one way or another, a human would have an appetite for it. And the question is, can you manage it? And my answer is you're going to manage it much better if you admit to it than if you say, I wouldn't want that kind of affirmation. Yes, I don't want it either. I don't want it in excess is what I don't want. I don't want unbridled self-affirmation like the Trumpists. How am I best off? How am I most likely to achieve that? By putting that stuff on the table and looking at it and admitting to it and to having other people see it too. And it's extremely dangerous to do so because when you do it, when I talk about masturbation in my articles, which Psychology Today won't take, I mean, the taboos are fascinating about it. I would like to find out more about the censorship laws. What year was that? Around what?
In the 1720s, during the reign of George the First.
Perfect. Because it turns out I read this wonderful book on the history of taboos on masturbation, and it was in the 1720s that it became a serious problem. And I think it was part of a whole explosion into a kind of liberation where that not only included masturbation and the censorship laws, but also the sudden rise in popular fiction. And suddenly there was a shock heard round the world and taboo to talk about, which is, oh shit, it turns out people have their own imaginations and they can go anywhere they want with them. So the taboos against women reading romantic novels and rubbing themselves, or against masturbation, which became the scapegoat for every pathology. It didn't happen early on. In Christianity, early Christianity, it wasn't nearly as taboo as other things. The spilling of the seeds thing, the onanism didn't have the kind of stigma it got after the 1720s. So we now live in a society that liberated it all, and a whole lot of what we did in the 1960s, in that period of extreme liberation, including mine, was we got more chuffed. What are you going to do with freedom? You're going to go out and find some more self-affirmation. It's when all those cults arose. It's and the hippies pretending like they solved reality. That whole appetite is just fundamental to human nature, and the sooner we can admit to it, the better. And it's really hard. It's really hard to admit that, you cannot. The number of people who tell me that they read my stuff but they can't like it because of their jobs. It's just, I mean, of course if I were them, this is the heart of it for me. If I were you, I'd be doing exactly what you're doing. If I was a Trumpist, I'd be doing exactly what part of me do I think, what exceptional, pure part of me am I bringing over to being someone else? I wouldn't put it past me is what I'm saying. That's all.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Yeah, it's the disdain for others, the sense of contempt that I read in the word gloat.
Yes, and I'm saying sadomasochism is the thing. It's a redundant term. Narcissism means either you're better than other people or they're worse than you. It's the same thing. It's always relative.
Yeah, and
you can say that you don't have disdain for them, but you did say earlier that you do. That you were torn when the guy told you that you were being disrespectful or inappropriate or whatever, that you said, I have mixed feelings about that, because part of me says he's right, and part of me says, these guys are dangerous. This Holocaust denying guy is dangerous. So that's where I live. We live in the same place that way.
Yeah, I said he commented that I was expressing my irritation.
Irritation, right. Like irritation's a bad thing. And that's the other thing for me, is that I don't get to use words like that. They're loose, load-bearing, loaded last words. As if irritation is something that someone shouldn't have, or that they can be dismissed for being irritated. I don't know anybody who isn't irritated.
The end of the thought was very simple, which is, my father was at the liberation of Belsen, and I if my friend was saying that I'm somebody who has helped people to think about things, and I should be that person. That for him to say something that's offensive or difficult, that I shouldn't have a human reaction, which I think is, we're in tune there, that somebody telling you how you should or shouldn't feel in response to what they're doing, because I don't, or it may sound as if I have calculated conversations with people. I don't. I come to somebody, see what they have to say, see what I make of it. And if it feels to me that they're doing something harmful to themselves, believing something harmful to themselves, I will try and get them to review it, to think about it in another way. So I am fascinated. Sorry, did you say that you had 10 years of psychoanalysis from the age of 8?
Before we go there, I
Sorry.
reserved that secret for you. And I don't want to go into a session on Freud. That's not the topic here.
No,
but
I don't. I'm just curious.
Yeah,
You're saying
okay.
that
But
you
I want
had
to catch
analysis
something
from
you
the
just
age of
said.
8?
Yes, I had 5 years starting at 8, 4 days a week on a couch, and then I had another 5 years at 35.
Okay.
Yeah, and leaving it was pivotal for me because I got over the question, what's wrong with me, and got onto the question, what's up with us, and that's been my question ever since. And making progress by my own standards on that was enough to make me feel like less is wrong with me. That is, I finally found my groove. But so there, you got it out of me. But I do want to go back to what you just said.
Thank you. Yeah.
I am a mixture of calculated and emotional, and that's the interesting thing. The other thing that affected me a lot in how I ended up, for better or for worse, I'm not in a position to speak on that. I won't declare it's for the better. I mean, it feels like it's for the better, but then I'd be the last to know if it wasn't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was dealing with my son. I have a wild son.
Can I say, I don't know if you looked at the comments on our last talk that went up at the weekend, but somebody had objected to what you said about your son. And I said, yeah, it concerned me too, that you made this public declaration about the
it's
relationship with your
new.
son.
I've gone 30 years without talking about him, even though he's been the major driver for my work.
Yeah.
But he, in the meantime, has been out there trashing me. For example, he a few months ago, maybe 8 months ago, he leafleted my neighborhood with something that said, Jeremy Sherman is a pedophile hiding in plain sight. And then a long diatribe against me, death threats, all of that. I'm now willing to talk about it more than I was before, in part because he resurfaced, and for a moment we were connecting again, and then he went right back to the same old diatribe. So I mean, he puts it on scientific sites, whatever, he'll trash me any way he can. I'm willing to talk about what I learned from it. I won't talk the details. And by the way, no one has to believe me. You can take his story. When I do my consulting with people who claim that they're dealing with an asshole, I don't take their word for it. So for whatever reason, this was a child who no one in the family and no one in the school systems, including a lot of expensive private school systems, could keep from being a Trumpist. I think he is a Trumpist by now. I wouldn't know for sure, but he talks like it a little bit. I was very emotional about it. Think about it. This is my firstborn pride and joy, my badge of honor, and I also had to keep him from becoming an asshole. And so there was something that developed in me. I became extremely calculating. That is, I got a PhD in decision science, in part inspired by trying to understand what's going on here. And now I do what I call psychostrategic consulting with people who are trying to figure out the situation. For that, it's extremely calculating. Now, this was a topic that came up a while ago between you and me. You talked about, we talked together about the role of passion or feelings in all of this. Now, I recognize that I'm a feeling person, and I exaggerate when I say I'm post-angst and post-outrage about Trump. This is not just a strategic game to me. I lose a lot of sleep over it. At the same time, I do come at it the way a criminologist does, and have to be much more calculating. They have to figure out what's going on. It's maybe close to jazz improvisation. I play jazz. I'm a bass player and a
Yeah.
singer, and for that you have to woodshed. You have to study a lot to internalize your calculations, and then you play through your expression to the
Mm.
extent you can.
Mm.
There's a difference between those two roles in me.
And
But
that is my approach to conversation. I'm not saying I don't calculate anything. I'm saying I don't come to somebody having spent hours and hours and hours of.
got
Usually,
it.
I
So,
don't.
so
It's an
right, that's right. No,
improvisation. Yeah.
I understand. Right, you learn from experience, and you've got
Yeah.
lots of it, and all of that. I get that. Um, One thing I have to do though, when someone describes me as upset, this is another standard move. I named four of them. Here's a fifth one, which is you're upset, therefore I can discount you.
Mm.
This from these people who are red in the face all the time.
Right.
Okay, so I don't say no, I'm not upset. I
Mm.
don't feel shame. You can't.
Mm.
If you're being
Mm.
calculated, you can't do that. You say, yeah, I'm fucking upset.
Mm.
Just like you, just like anyone. I mean, this is
Mm.
kind of fundamental to my approach to undermining them. And I have to pre-grieve that I can get upset. That is,
Mm.
I can't be shocked by the attack. That's
Mm.
another part of the calculation. I cannot be shocked that they accuse me of something and go into my moi, impossible kind of flustered state.
Mm.
No, I have to have pre-grieved it. How do I pre-grieve it? By talking my walk. Again, that's what it is. I'm trying to put this stuff on the table and
Mm.
imagine the possibility. I just exercised it a minute ago when I said, you guys get to decide. We all get our own opinion about whether my work is better or is good. That is, I have to have visited the possibility that I will have spent my entire career barking up the wrong tree. If
Mm.
I pre-grieve it, then it's not a shock when someone says, and why did I do this? I would guess a lot of it was that I had to withstand a whole lot of blows like those leaflets my firstborn son put through the neighborhood. So when he did that, I called the police. I didn't run and hide like as a pedophile. What he was talking about was the most amusing example. It was a time when he came into threatening to beat me up. He was working out. I had confiscated a loaded gun he had under his bed. He was 16 years old. I had a 3-year-old in the house. He came in the house and I tried out something different. I experiment with how you deal with someone who
Mm.
behaves like a Trumpist does. I said, if you get any closer to me, I'm going to pull down my pants. He left the room and I never pulled down my pants. And ever
Mm.
since then, he's called me a pedophile. But
Mm.
he's also told me that he'd get the Russian mob on me for having force fed him tofu. And his girlfriend's the daughter of a Russian mob. So, I mean, there's something lucky about my dealing with him because he's so pure.
Mm.
He's so pure in absolutism. That is, he's always right. He's never wrong. He blames me for everything. And so there's an advantage to that. It's not, it can look absurd.
Mm.
And it has made me that much more calculated. I am passionate, but it's not, I try to keep it out of my dealings with them.
Yeah.
All the way out to I will tear into them and then say afterward, I will cut them.
Mm.
My attempt is to cut them so they bleed,
Mm.
but I don't actually. I have the capacity to walk away. I have the courage of my own insignificance. That is, I know that they just a voter. I don't end up having to feel like if I don't win this thing, I'm out. It's calculated in that respect, but it's all driven by a fundamental passion.
Mm.
That is, I don't believe in a kind of neutrality that humans are capable of neutrality. I wouldn't want to.
No,
My,
I don't either.
yeah, that's
I have
right.
enough people telling me. I mean, recently on Twitter, people have been telling me to stay in my lane. I've had somebody who said that I should be writing about child marriage in Afghanistan and this sort of stuff. And you can see that was in fact on the last thing with you. You can see my response to that, which I held back for 24 hours because I thought, well, I'm being pompous here. But I thought, well, I'm going to be pompous. I have written about Muti marriage, the fact that he hasn't read it. But why are you talking about Trump? And it's like, well, because Rome is burning and it's time to stop fiddling. So, it's time to be outspoken. When they came for the Jews, I did nothing. Yeah, okay. It's time to be outspoken. It's time to do something. Let me say that I'm tremendously sorry to hear about the way you've been harassed by your son. I have tremendous sympathy because I too have been leafleted, though not by one of my own children, thankfully, by an organization.
Right.
And they spent 16 years on a daily basis doing such things. So
Sure.
I have
Yeah.
a sympathy for what happens in the community when, you know, this kind of nonsense happens, and how dreadful. Um, would and as you say, it's a driver for me. If I'd left Scientology in 1983 when I did, and they'd said, fair enough, it would have been all right. I'd have walked away and carried on my career as an artist, had more shows, sold more paintings. But when I was put in charge of the first meeting of disaffected Scientologists, about 60 people in the UK, quite by chance, I turned up and there were two Scientologists on the door taking everybody's names. And that's the sort, it was like, no, I'm not, that's horrible. And I found out that was, that on the recruiting side, you've got we're lovely and we'll liberate you and make you self-determined. And on the back of that, we've got if you say a word against us, we will destroy you. And that is the word used in the dispatch, destroy. Ruin is also used. So getting into that kind of situation, what I see something in parallel here with Trump followers. Scientologists, for the most part, are well-meaning people who really want the world to be a better place, who want to help everybody. They want to clear the planet and all that kind of thing. They don't realize what they're caught up with. They don't realize that the machine that they're part of is devouring people. It is, a vampiric, spiritually vampiric movement that enslaves people psychologically and physically, and is guilty of human trafficking and all this kind of thing. They see it from where they are in the continuum of influence, as Steve Hassan puts it, that, which is on the outside. And so with so many Trump voters, that they see it from their position in the continuum and they don't understand for some reason. And with Scientology, I've been able to explain in great detail how, deceptive it is, how manipulative it is. But to say this is what you, I think, call absolutism, what I tend to call authoritarianism, we could call it autocracy, various other things. To say that, for me, staying in my lane in response to those people who think I should, my lane is authoritarianism. I've been writing and speaking about it for 40 years. And when I started obsessing over Trump as a fascinating subject in 2015, and I had seen things about him before that, but I got everything I could about him and went, oh yeah, this guy exemplifies this. Is there something I can learn here? Is there something, because I think that the human race, for its own salvation, has to wake up, has to start moving towards positive goals rather than the kind of individualistic mess that is the Western world, or the even worse world that was the communist world and that still is China and North Korea, and progressively more so Russia, I fear, again. But are there ways of getting people to wake up and smell the coffee? And there are, and we've talked about some of those, and perhaps, perhaps that will stimulate somebody to think something. Perhaps it will stimulate somebody to talk to somebody else. But I do know that it's pretty unlikely that any, I suppose it's heartening that you're getting Trump voters who are communicating with you. I'm just getting people leaving comments saying, I'm going to vote Republican. It's like, yeah, okay. Didn't learn
Right.
anything from that, really. With a little heart, usually, though, I must say.
Right. So this is one of the reasons I love you, John, is
Thank you.
uh, because you turned your personal experience into a broader exploration that I think we all need to be doing at this point. How do you humbly humble humans who will say or do anything to avoid human humility. That kind of thing is just, that's a fundamental question. And you're on it and I'm on it, and we have these conversations in which we explore different possibilities. And I'm trying things out that are different, and you talk to other people, and we're figuring out what we could relax and what we could have to hold firm in talking to such people. Some people think that we need to hold firm, uh, not being inappropriate with them, um, because that doesn't work, or rude to them.
Mm.
Um, I I center myself, I ground myself in the assumption that that's the whole point, not for nothing to work. So if someone says, "Oh, don't do that, that won't work," um, it doesn't move me. I say, "That's right. That tends not to work very strongly um, because the whole design is for nothing to work. That's all that's going on, is for nothing to get through to them is the point."
Yeah.
Um, uh, and then there are other people who say, very proudly, that they can't figure them out and they don't need to, um, because they just walk away, and they're really proud of it. They're proud of it. It's that proud use of the rhetorical question, what the hell's up with these folks? And I'm saying, no, that doesn't work either. Yeah, sometimes you have to fight with the pig, even though you'll get dirty and the pig likes it at
Yeah.
first. The point is to make it so the pig doesn't like it. Trying to figure out how to do that. And I experiment on the edge using the safety I've got,
Mm.
the safety that I've had for decades now, where I can afford to be mouthy. I probably am by temperament. Um, and other people can't afford it and don't have it in their temperament. So I am trying to figure out this combination of carrots and sticks, where to pinch them, as you said,
Mm.
and where to love them up, to
Mm.
where to show. I'm trying to figure out how to affirm them on things that I'm looking for more of. It's basically behaviorism, and how to sting them on things that don't work. And yeah, we did go through a period where we talked about how negative reinforcement, or punishment doesn't work. I don't believe it. I believe that I have responded to a whole lot of negative reinforcement in my life. That
Yeah.
is, the occasional bitch slap has helped me out. Not at first, no
Mm.
fun, but just because I said ouch didn't mean that it didn't help.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need it.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's where it becomes a teaching method, that be,
Yeah, one of the two
and
tools. I got reward and punishment. Those are the two.
yeah, and I think that we
And space taking
okay,
and distance. Those three.
yeah, and pretty red cloaks and an almost fanatical devotion to the Pope. That's five. Biggles the rack. Um, yeah, the yeah, James Joyce said in Portrait of the Artist at the end talks about there being three types of art, which I think is relevant to our conversation. The first is art which you wish to possess, and he calls that pornography. The second is work that is didactic and seeks to teach you, and that repels you. And the third form, and the form that interested him, and as an artist, the form that interests me the most, is transcendent, where you can't move. So walking into the Prado and looking at Velázquez Crucifixion, there was no way that my body would do anything anymore. I'm just aghast with this thing. And I think so our attraction to something, our repulsion from something, and our need to be inert, our need to stand still are part of what will happen to us. And sometimes, yeah, a little, a bitch slap or whatever is useful sometimes to be, kicked off your soapbox or your hobby horse or whatever height you've attained is useful. But as a method of teaching, the kind of, Zen, I'm going to hit you with this stick or I'm going to cut your finger off or what have you. Sometimes it's appropriate, but we need to be careful about how we use it because often it is deeply damaging, that people are traumatized because too much force was used or they are humiliated too much. And it,
I would say that about all three.
Mm.
I would say that
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I agree.
So I mean, to me, if you just take reward and punishment,
Mm.
punishment can paralyze you or be so off-putting that you run away, um, and and it can also be the wake-up call.
Mm.
Reward can make you complacent,
Yeah.
or it can make you comfortable enough that you can move forward. We have to, there's a problem with all of those, including the space taking. You know, we experimented here with no longer talking about Trump to see if he'd go away, that he'd just run out of air. That didn't work either. So the three strategies all make sense. And I see in the uh, what did you call transcendent
Mm.
art, in that particular thing, the crucifix, we see um, the roots of a self-winding movement. So Joyce grows up in that culture,
Mm.
but it's a self-winding movement in this respect. No matter how you shake it, it gets wound up. So Christ is the perfect icon for this because on the one hand, he's the heroic martyr, and on the other, he's the heroic King of Kings. So if people are against me, it proves I'm right. If people are with me, it proves I'm right. And that's what we're dealing with the Trumpists, is that everything proves them right. They're self-winding in that respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the reason that I was stunned by Velázquez as a painter was the paint, not what the image represented
Whatever,
at
but
all.
if you
So
look at who the
I'm not
majority,
disagreeing with you. I'm just
yeah, the majority
clarifying
of
that point.
people are transfixed by this holy torture instrument thing.
Yeah,
It's an
the whole BDSM aspect
Right,
of
that's
the
right.
Christian
That's right.
religion.
Why
Yeah.
why did Christ die on the cross? Because he forgot his safe word. That kind of thing.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so but that's what we've got in Trump as well.
Mm.
As every time it's always a witch hunt if he's losing,
Mm.
and it's always proof that he's right.
Yeah.
Just like Christ, right?
Declare victory. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
and and it's very unclear what Christ was even teaching in the first place. I don't think it matters as much as that heads I win, tails you lose, or tails I win, heads you lose. Self-winding movement feature.
mm.
That's, I think, what really draws people to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complex issue. I mean, at the moment I'm working on 4 different books. I don't know how this happened. And one of them is about the Book of Revelation
Yeah,
and its influence on culture, and realizing that it's the single most destructive document in human history. Not because of what it says, because what it says is in 64 AD, Nero persecuted Christians to get
right.
over playing his lyre, or whatever, his fiddle while Rome was burning. And that's what it says. But it's been interpreted as prophecy since
Yeah, and it's
Joachim of.
prophecy of retribution. That is,
Yes,
all of
absolutely.
my enemies will be beaten down,
Yeah,
and
and it,
it's there in the Old Testament. I mean, I know that book better than the other. Um, it, it- yeah,
mm,
we ask God to smite our enemies.
yeah, and it
That's
is in opposition to the Christian message that's in, and I'm an agnostic, so no pig in the game, but it is in opposition to any messages of love and tolerance that I'm going to have a great time wiping all of you people out. But yeah, whichever way, I believe that the light's gone off where you are. I believe that
has it.
you're plunged into sempiternal gloom. Um,
This is, I can turn up the lights. I don't know why that happened. It doesn't look like it on my screen. It's probably something on, um, it's not me. Speak for yourself.
yeah, exactly. Can you put
Is
me
this
in my
any
place?
better? Look at
That's uh,
how glowing I am.
you are
How,
glowing now.
am I
It's
not white and delightsome? All
you are
right.
white and delightsome. So I think that this is enough of an adventure for one day,
I
probably.
certainly agree. I need a nap.
Yeah, of course you do. After talking to me, everybody needs a nap.
That's
So we will convene again after the erection, um, and see how
what
big
world we have
Arnold's
left.
Palmer is. Yeah, see
Yep,
what's left in the flesh. It has been
exactly.
a delight and a pleasure, and I look forward to the brickbats that will be hurled at me for having yet again recorded with you. And we'll stick it up on, so to speak, on both of our channels and see if anybody salutes it. Maybe I don't know.
It's lovely talking with you, John.
Likewise, Jeremy. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.